Welcome back. This is our last session of the day, the panel. Thank you very much to you, George, for talking to us about file security and some of the challenges with files in an organization. I just want to remind you that if we're now at the end of the presentations of the day, and if there's any of the technology that you've seen here today that you want to know more about, please let us know in the feedback form, and we'll make sure that we set up follow-up meetings for you. I asked all the vendors here today to make sure that they didn't speak for more than 20 minutes. And of course, there's much more in their platforms than just 20 minutes worth of content. So I'm sure that some of you have seen technology that's really interesting for you, and will be glad to deep dive on that. Again, remember to fill out your feedback form so that we can make sure that we can send a lucky winner off on a nice retreat somewhere. I don't know if any one of you have seen the science fiction movie from 1968 called A Space Odyssey. The Space Odyssey, one of the main characters there is a computer called HAL 9000, and HAL 9000 actually has this voice and keeps talking to the main human character in that environment. Soumya, she will be moderating our session here, so we'll be hearing her voice where she will talk about some of the questions that she will be asking us. So instead of having a HAL 9000, we have Soumya from our marketing team who will be moderating this session. So Soumya, what did you find about the sessions today?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the Security Spotlight Forum. I think it has been extremely exciting, to say the least. And even I believe cloud is one concept in information security, cybersecurity, which is no more just about IT teams anymore, right? Cloud is something everybody is dealing with it. I think even kids know about it, we parents talk about it, it's everywhere. So considering that, I think it's fair enough that someone from the non-technical team does the moderation today. So we also see cloud, not just from the IT security or just from the selling part, but kind of just jazz it up and see how it works. One of my questions, so I was going through the different sessions, I heard a lot of the use of multi-cloud. And I understand, okay, there's single cloud, there's multi-cloud. And my question is, if organizations are already running a single cloud environment and they're happy with the security tools and everything, why should they be even considering multi-cloud? So, and while looking at a multi-cloud tool, Nicolai, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's just about making sure that you can work with multiple cloud environments. It's never really good to be in a scenario where you're too dependent on one specific party of yours. So sometimes it's good to have alternatives. That would be my quick answer.
Abdul, Rahman, would you like to say something to this?
Yeah, I'll probably pick one on my side to give the rest of the panel a chance. I think my choice would be, if I look at this from how organizations are responding back to requirements for the business, I think the use case really determines what kind of cloud do we use. An approach for the development community could be very AWS friendly, but even if you're deploying a machine learning application, GCP would do a better job over there. A third case for Azure around data lake and others. So I think the use case really dictates the choice of cloud, and that's why customers would end up in a situation that they would have a multi-cloud environment.
Right. So before, I was I think Aviatrix has this thing about the no matter number of clouds, they make sure the cloud networking and security is taken care of. So is there there was also this question from the customers basically who asked, is there one tool that there is which allows the organizations to have a single pane of control and visibility across both single cloud and multiple clouds? Ides, can you comment on that?
Yeah, so instead of HAL 9000, I would say Soumya 2020. So and also a much better voice than the one of Stanley Kubrick that was invented over there. So yeah, I believe just to follow up on the comment just made. Typically, all the customers that we've met so far, they all set out for a single cloud strategy. And there is always a very first use case that they started with, as was mentioned, could have been DevOps, but then the enterprise got in there. Maybe there is a strategic choice being made to use front door, but then the backend applications might be, let's say, in a previous cloud, or maybe the Oracle cloud will be embraced for that one, because there are still some applications running on there. So what we've seen is that in the last couple of years, even if the desire is there for single cloud, you see truly the multi-cloud coming up for various reasons. You know, there was the application proficiency, there was any other type of reasoning behind that one. Also to avoid a little bit, maybe a single cloud vendor lock-in in that one, or for utmost failure. So what we tend to see is that it's not only one single region, but then also multiple clouds. And Aviatrix stepped into that challenge because basically Aviatrix is already around since a couple of years. And at that time, it was typically mono-cloud strategy that we saw. But then with the multi-cloud environment spinning up, we clearly saw that there was a need for a single control plane or management plane, because otherwise you need to become an expert in multiple cloud networking capabilities, but also you will have maybe tens of different tabs open just to follow the topology of where your networking connectivity is at. And that's why it's an elevation of the information which is already available in some of the clouds that now gives you the possibility to have that single control plane available in your cloud of choice. So whether AWS is your main cloud or Azure is your main cloud, it doesn't really matter where you start off from, but all the other clouds that you will embrace will have the same look and feel.
Right. And in terms of cloud, like there always has been concerns about like, is my data safe? What kind of data is being collected? I saw Ahmad from Shape Security, his presentation had a lot of really nice animations talking about the kind of data being collected, imposters, good and bad humans and behavior. So Ahmad, like in terms of this collecting data, so for cloud security, for cloud, what kinds of data do we really need to collect? And then how do we actually make sure that is secure? What are your thoughts on those?
Very good question. Now, mainly customers, when we talk to customers, they are very concerned, specifically in this region, about PII data, whether we are collecting personally identifier and identifying data, PII, personally information identifiers. So here what happens is that we don't collect any of those. Shape is reverse proxy, often see the entire shape or HTTP transaction. So it doesn't log any PII data. What we do is we log the key and the keys action and the mouse movement actions like key up and key down, but the speed of typing, but we never collect any information about, let's say, individual key values. So that's why, because we know about, even in Europe, it's much more difficult with the rules and regulations, that compliance regulations they have. So that was exactly, or that's exactly what we do. And that's helped us a lot in spot the behavioral, let's say, or do behavioral analysis of the user while they are interacting with the web form and how they are typing their passwords. Because even if you type your password or my Facebook password, I type it 10 times or 100 times, I will never type it at the same speed. So if someone is typing it at the same speed for 100 times, that's definitely not a human. These are the kind of metrics or signals we look at.
Right. So another thing, like I was also listening, I think Nicolai, like all of the presenters actually had some kind of a reference to that. Obviously the new normal, the pandemic, and everything moving to cloud. I have been a person who is not a fan of visiting supermarkets, let's just say it. So I have always been the one who goes online and orders everything. So I had this question at one point of time, like, why are there even like this brick and mortar premises? Why can't everybody just move everything to the cloud? But it seems it's not that easy as it looks like. My question is to George. So in terms of moving applications to cloud, what do you think are the main challenges? And like, why is securing files in the cloud even tougher, or is it the same, or tell me a little more about it.
That's a great question, Soumya, and thank you for this. There's obviously a need to move to the cloud, right? Services grow, the companies go digital, so there's definitely a need. There's definitely a need to adopt multiple clouds, willingly or non-willingly. A company might focus on AWS because it's, as it's been stated, very developer-centric, but they, in the same time, might use Microsoft Office 365 license, which kind of like forces them to use OneDrive from a storage account perspective. All those cloud vendors also offer a possibility of storing files and ingesting files into different applications. As we all know, files are a big attack surface that it's among one of the most common exploitable attack surfaces, I would say. So then there's definitely a need to make sure we secure that. It's very difficult to find a solution that's versatile enough to help secure files in the cloud, on-premise, in transit. So OPSWAT does exactly that. Essentially, we're striving to make sure we secure the most important data entry point in a network with those technologies that I mentioned.
Right. So Nicolai, you have always, like, especially at HelpAG, we always stressed on the 360-degree approach to cybersecurity. And when we protect data, we protect applications, we do it everywhere, on-premise, cloud, everywhere. So what are your thoughts? Like, what are the challenges that you mostly see from your discussions with customers? And what are your thoughts on that?
Good. Again, I think we're dealing with some specific challenges to the region, or let's at least call it adoption in the region. First of all, we didn't really have any cloud data centers here. We have Microsoft Azure here now, but and that to some customers is acceptable to utilize Microsoft Azure for the kind of data that they want to host in the cloud. But what's also, of course, interesting is something like the Etisalat E1 cloud environment, which is really a cloud environment that's operated and delivered by Etisalat directly inside the same data centers that are operating other environments, right? So I think today, as customers, they kind of understand more and more some of the capabilities around cloud. They will also understand how they can start to utilize it in a better way. There's no doubt that the whole let's say regime around compliance and regulations around how you can dealt with specifically here in the region, but I think we're getting there, and we're starting to see real adoption of cloud happening.
Perfect. So, like we had this slide, like why cloud, why not cloud, and then we say how cloud. So my point is, there's so many advantages of cloud. Obviously, that is for sure. But okay, we have heard there are challenges and things like that. But why do you think, if there's so many advantages, why are not all the customers already on cloud? This is something I really want to know from each one of you, that why has it already not been done? So Nicolai, why don't we start with you and we listen to everyone?
I think I just talked a little bit about it, right? I also think that it's because people are basically a little bit worried about how do they secure themselves in cloud. Mm-hmm. I think we have mitigating controls for pretty much all of the issues that you might have. So if you're worried about your data, we can talk about encryption and some of the great technologies we have in that space. If you're worried about web application security, well, then we have solutions for that as well, right? So I think it's all about identifying that those mitigating controls that's also fit for the cloud world, right? And I think that's where companies like HelpAG also comes in.
Right. Abdul, Rahman, what are your thoughts on the same?
I think in the region we're moving at a very fast pace. I think we're moving from the stage of early adopters to early majority. And I think we've already crossed the chasm in the region, in the Middle East. I think the challenges that we have, and this is probably beyond the UAE, is regulatory in nature for a lot of customers. regulation is still in the gray for a lot of countries. Even though there are regulations set for certain countries, but if you start to drill down, I think it's really hard to understand and interpret some of these, and that's where customers shy away. And that's why you find customers that are progressive around cloud usage are those that do not need to really comply. Organizations that have a global footprint that can get away with that. But I think also the lack of in-country cloud service providers really slows things down. If you look at where the UAE is today compared to 18 months ago, I think it's very obvious the impact that Azure created. And I think that's going to go away over the next 24 months with a lot of announcements for more and more cloud service providers helping customers address data residency requirements.
Right. Ides.
Well, yeah, one of the biggest challenges that I see specifically with the financials that was already mentioned by Abdul is specifically around the regulations. So I'm based out of Belgium, and even the surrounding countries that I have, for example, in France, also for the FinServ industry, there is a very strong focus on the private data that cannot really go to the cloud. So one of the challenges, and they are actively working on this one, is how can they separate the data still to make the maximum of use to the cloud? Because it's very clear for them that they want to embrace the cloud, they need to embrace the cloud, but they need to find a very specific way how they can make 100% sure that none of, let's say, the GDPR data actually sneaks into the cloud. And we have other type of companies into the chemical, medication and so on that are still a little bit constrained by these type of laws. But also very recently, for example, in Poland, you see changes where, for example, under strict regulations, now Polish banks can actually make use of the public clouds. So you see that there is slowly, depending on various country regulations, that the adoption continues. So we don't really see a stop. There have been a massive movement and acceleration within the UAE GCC, thanks to the Azure environment, which is now available, and it will simply not stop. So maybe for just a few who didn't saw the light yet, and there will be always these type of companies that are not going to the cloud, but even then, cloud providers will also address these type of customers by, for example, bringing the cloud into their data centers. Think about Azure Stack, think about AWS Outpost. GCP, Google Cloud, is also working on a software solution that you can install on your premises. So it's something like, well, if you don't go to the cloud will be coming to you anyway. So I see a great future on that one, and it's an unstoppable machine.
Right. Ahmad, do you want to add something to that?
Honestly, it's quite similar to the same points that my colleagues here have mentioned. But maybe a few things I would like to add, maybe two specific things. First, customers are being very concerned about whether we are taking away, whether us as Shape or F5 or any other vendor are taking some PII data and send it to the cloud outside. So again, it's a security thing, it's compliance thing. This is one thing. The other thing is there is a trend like, I don't want the service, if I'm in Europe, I want the service to come from Europe if it's a managed service. Like if I have a SOC in US and I'm customer in Europe, no, I need something to be closer to me. So these are two things that I see. And one specific thing for Middle East, I don't know, it started to become popular, honestly. And I see it a barrier, kind of barrier, or maybe in some time it will get resolved. Like some countries, they don't allow you to send their information to any cloud or any POP or point of presence for your service outside the country itself. Like if I am in country X, then Shape, you have to have a POP in this country itself. So these are some constraints we are facing. me personally, on top of what maybe Nicolai addressed about the security of their data in the cloud.
Right. So Nicolai, there is one question I would like to ask, which is on behalf of the customers that we have got. So there's a question that how can organizations plan and prioritize their cloud investments? So what would you say to that?
They should spend all the money on security, right? No, let's be serious. If you spend all the money on security, you're not going to have anything to secure because you spend it on security. No, you know, obviously there's many elements to that. My concern always when I look at cloud journeys for clients, right, is that maybe they're not spending enough on ensuring that their environments are secure. So we still today focus a lot on functionality of those specific environments, and security is still sometimes an afterthought. And with the velocity and with the agility and speed that we see applications being developed in cloud, it's actually extremely costly to start fixing those things afterwards. So that's the reason why I think do not underestimate that security is required, right? And it's much, much easier to, you know, Abdul Rahman, he was talking about shifting security left in the way that you think about security. It's much more cost effective to shift your security left in the environment so that when you're finished producing your application, when you're finished starting to serve people on your cloud application or cloud delivered application, security is already embedded and ingrained into that specific system. You're going to end up with a scenario where you have something which is much more secure than we can ever fix retrospectively. And the next thing is that you'll also end up with something that's more secure at the end of the day. You know, really, when you think about cloud, I cannot emphasize enough that security is a day zero job, right? It's something you have to consider from the get-go onwards, right?
Right. And one thing I wanted to also understand, so like when we are moving so many things to the cloud and it needs to be done, like Ides, could you tell me like how to make sure the SLAs are up even when you're moving more and more applications to the cloud? How can you make sure of that?
Well, that fits nicely within the Aviatrix story when it's about SLAs. So, you know, keeping the SLAs up when being on-prem was one of the very first or primary targets for any IT manager, any security manager on-prem. So while organizations want to take advantage of the agility of the cloud, the hyperscaling capabilities and so on, you cannot really lose track of the SLA on that one. You know, the story that the cloud never fails or that there is always an abundance of resource, it's not true. I won't say that it's on the contrary, that it's not always right, but you know, we have to face it that parts of the cloud can fail. Connectivity will fail on this one. So also hence the dual cloud strategy. But now for the IT manager, bringing also the crown jewels of the company in terms of applications into the cloud, the same level of SLA needs to be maintained. And the SLA is not only the networking part, but also the security part. You know, both gentlemen, including George, will specifically confirm that you know, when there is a breach, it can lead to hours, days of outage of certain organizations. So it's all part of the SLA, but it starts typically, and that's in my favor, of course, with the network. No network, no pleasure. That's for sure. And that's why with giving visibility, the control, but also taking into account the same level or even a better level of security, because now you can do it differently, should be, let's say, on the forefront of any planning of an organization into the cloud. And as Nicolai mentioned it, this should be a day zero job, because it will come, you know, it will haunt you anyway, whether you do it on day 2 or day 3 or day 4, but you will have to face that matter. So the better you're prepared on this one, taking it all the way from the left of the development of the application into, let's say, the final delivery of the application, that's where it fits the best. And that's how you can maintain that SLA, because it's a continuous moving target on that one. You will expand through regions, you will expand through clouds, but if you're on your journey for expansion, it cannot become at a cost of an SLA, which is you know, dramatically low, that your customers start complaining.
Right. I have a very interesting question from the audience that I believe maybe George or Ahmad would like to answer. So we have seen that organizations have been forcefully collecting PII information with the use of technologies there today. So Amazon, Facebook, Google, all have admitted to that in some way or the other. How would one secure themselves, and or is it just going to be forcefully abused by cyber threats? George, would you like to take that out?
Yes, definitely. If it's about PII is part of different files that reside in a network, then we have two technologies to address that. Obviously, a proactive DLP solution, but also our data sanitization can do something very interesting, removing comments, revisions, metadata from documents or images, just to help protect with that. So there is a technological solution for that. It just has to be used. Obviously, this is not going to address the whole spectrum of how that data can be collected, but I'm sure there are other solutions that can do that in a different way.
Right. Ahmed, do you want to add something, or anybody else who would be interested to comment on this?
Well, from my own perspective, as I said, we don't get those PII data. We don't collect them. However, there are a few cases where if there is an agreement and a permission assigned agreement between us and the customer to collect a few of them in order to be able to give much more deeper insight, then we can go for that. But other than this, as I mentioned, I collect things related to the behavior rather than the actual values or users.
Right. Perfect. We have another question, which actually falls very exactly with some discussion I was having with Nicolai a few days back. In terms of like managed with the cloud decision, especially in the new normal, came as like they say forced digital transformation, and it came as a direction from the management. And maybe every other team was not prepared for it. So that's exactly also what's showing in the audience question, that there may not always be the skill sets available for the latest cloud technologies. So are there any something called managed cloud services on offer from Help AG or the vendors we have present today? Nicolai, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, so we do a number of things in this specific space. You know, obviously bridging that that gap around competence as well. You know, many customers will feel uncomfortable as they move onto cloud as well. How do you get the right knowledge about the latest technology and the latest security and capabilities of cloud environments? And that's where you would be working with consultants as well.
Anyone else wants to comment on that?
I believe for Help AG, there is definitely, let's say, additional services that they can offer into their current customer base. As mentioned, also part of let's say, the Aviatrix reason is that there is that skill gap, I would say, because you cannot simply be ready in 1 month. Coming from maybe very good and solid on-prem networking and security knowledge, and just take it with you into the cloud. Of course, the concepts will remain the same. The flows are still the same, but the way how you can visualize it, or maybe you cannot visualize it, the way how you can troubleshoot, or maybe you cannot even troubleshoot it, without first contacting the cloud provider, that's exactly the space where the managed service provider can really help. And that can be various stages. That can be security managed service provisioning, specifically in the cloud, for example, which is already going on. But that could also be bringing security straight into the VPC where the applications live, and so on. So it will be a menu that the customers can choose from on what type of service they expect to be delivered by the MSP. And I hope that Help AG will play a crucial role in it.
And maybe I should also just comment, it is something that we're already doing today, right? So everywhere from our managed security services, where a lot of focus has been put into how do we make sure that we can actually deliver incident response and understand the events from the cloud environments, right? Because it's a completely different way. How do you extract events from cloud environments? And that's why you need the technology, and you also need the understanding of these new kinds of topologies, right? And then of course also when it comes to the technology, one of the things when we set out on our cloud journey some years ago, what we also figured out is that it's not all technology that we have been working with clients with up until today that's actually as relevant in the cloud environment as it was on-prem, right? So we also needed a new set of technologies to work with clients around, and that's obviously an area that we take very, very seriously. Yeah, so there's multiple changes to how you think about IT as you move into cloud.
And maybe I would like to add something here, and Nicolai, correct me if I'm wrong. We are working with Help AG closely to offer Shape as a managed service. Why? Because it's a very dynamic technology. Let's say if I'm an attacker and you mitigated my attack, I will go and retool. And the retooling might be in a couple of hours, might be in 2 days. So you need a SOC team that is always on top of the traffic pattern to respond immediately in real time. And that's one of the values, real values, that Help AG can offer us here in the region.
Thank you, Ahmad. So there's one more question from the audience that I believe maybe Abdul Rahman would like to take up. So our organization is moving to a microservices architecture very soon. Where do we start from in terms of the best practices to ensure that the environment is secure?
Microservices are really different in how they provide you with an opportunity to achieve security by design. We always talk about security by design for legacy applications, but in reality, the tool set is non-existent. And what we ended up doing is bolting or wrapping the application in multiple layers for us to achieve that. The opportunity with microservices and the way microservices are delivered is we have multiple touch points that allow us to integrate or bake security into the development phase. As Nicolai said earlier, not only is that a very smart way of doing things that would ultimately fix 60 to 80%, depending on your organization, of challenges that could otherwise present themselves in runtime, but it's also the cheaper approach. We usually have far more developers than we have SOC analysts. If we don't, then Help AG's SOC business would not be in business, or other managed service providers, but there's a requirement for that talent. And I think the amount of developers that we have and the opportunity that we have with microservices to integrate security into the build, shape, and run phases, in my opinion, is very important. So security by design, security from day zero, start thinking of how do you integrate security, start thinking of the tooling, and make sure that you do that early on. Because if you do not, and we've seen a lot of organizations kind of shy away from doing that early on, they would get a tool or two to achieve specific outcomes, and then they're stuck with that tooling. And it becomes really hard with the velocity that you have around development to move away from those tools.
Right. In terms of like talking of security being a day zero job, there's also a question that we have, like, what are some of the primary risks faced by organizations that they face on moving to the cloud that they need to look out for?
Is that question for me?
It's to the panel. Anybody, feel free.
I can answer. There are multiple things you have to think about. The first one, I think, and then picking on the previous question as well, is the level of abstraction that we have in cloud environments. The control that we have of the underlying infrastructure diminishes as we progress through advanced form factors of compute. So as you move into microservices and beyond and functions as a service, your capability of control of the underlying infrastructure and then the ability of implementing things there reaches a point of non-existence. So that's an area where we depart from traditional security. The second is the high level of automation in the environments. We usually, or predominantly in our environments, respond back with a lot of manual controls. There is automation to a certain extent, but the level of automation you have in these cloud environments is really hard to go and respond back with anything but automation. And if you do respond back with a manual check, then what you're going to end up doing is taking out a lot of value from what these cloud environments could provide to you. So between, I think, automation and abstraction, these are probably the biggest challenges that I think customers face, not to mention other specifics and details around how different these environments are built, how things as simple as networking are done in a certain way within Microsoft Azure, but they're completely different in AWS. So what works for one cloud provider doesn't necessarily work for the other. And that's where I find a lot of organizations challenged around mapping risks across multiple clouds and how do they map controls against these.
Right. So I think now that we are almost ending the end of the panel discussion. So Nicolai, would you like to have any closing remarks before we wrap it up?
Well, of course, I can only say thank you to our speakers here in the event. I think you made a great effort at making sure that we had some content that was really relevant for customers to listen into. Again, to the customers, thank you very, very much. And the clients that were on the call here today, thank you very, very much for participating here. As I mentioned earlier, I am very, very excited about the opportunity of working with cloud security. And we take a lot of pride in making sure that we are delivering very good services in this specific space. If there's any of the technology that you have seen here today that you would be interested in hearing more about, again, fill out the feedback form, highlight which vendors you want to talk more with, and then we'll make sure that we facilitate a specific presentation for you. And I'm sorry we ran a little bit over. I think we managed to still redeem ourselves in the sense that after our little hiccup at the beginning, we were able to get back on track. And with that, I am looking forward inviting you for our next Security Spotlight Forum in about 3 months' time. We still hope that it can be physical, but if not, I think this was actually a relatively good alternative.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks a lot for joining us. And definitely do not forget to fill in the survey. And you definitely get an attendance certificate. But I think even more interesting is we give you 2 nights of staycation in a beautiful destination in Dubai. I think with all the stress and all the cloud on-premise, I think everybody deserves a break. And thanks once again for joining us, and see you at the next SSF. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.